Jung's most alarming discovery wasn't about mental disorders. It centered on people who perceive everything others overlook, and why this ability often destroys them. In his clinical work, Jung described patients with what he termed differentiated perception. These were individuals capable of catching micro-expressions, sensing hidden feelings, and recognizing psychological patterns invisible to everyone else. They pierced through social masks, exposed lies instantly, and felt the unconscious tensions present in any room. Jung regarded this discovery as dangerous because such people repeatedly ended up isolated, drained, and incapable of sustaining ordinary relationships. Not because they were unstable, but because perceiving so much carried a psychological cost few could grasp. Today I'll explore Jung's most perilous finding about people who see everything, and why he believed this rare capacity either ruins a person or transforms them into something extraordinary. The case that revealed this came from a patient Jung described in his private notes. She was a highly introverted, intuitive type who sought him out in 1913, during the period of Jung's own personal crisis after his break with Freud. This woman, later fitting what Jung would classify as the rarest psychological type, had what he called undifferentiated intuitive perception. She could enter any setting and immediately pick up on the psychological atmosphere. Who was lying, who was hurting, who held unspoken resentments. Jung wrote, "The patient shows an extraordinary ability to perceive unconscious contents in others, but this faculty seems to cause her distress rather than benefit. She couldn't engage in casual small talk because she saw through every facade. Friendships slipped away because others felt exposed in her presence. Holding down a job was impossible, since her awareness disrupted the unconscious social contracts that keep groups functioning." Jung realized he wasn't treating illness. What he observed was what happens when the unconscious becomes too conscious, when perception is too finely tuned for social survival. He recorded how she described others with uncanny precision. She speaks of people as if she could access their hidden motives and private thoughts. When I test her observations through careful questioning, they turn out remarkably accurate. This was not delusion, nor psychosis. It was a form of awareness so advanced it had become socially hazardous. But Jung noticed something even more unsettling. The patient's extraordinary perception seemed nearly inexplicable. To understand it, he began exploring what he later called participation mystique, a phenomenon where people with highly differentiated intuition absorb not only conscious signals but the entire unconscious field of those around them. In his Red Book notes, Jung wrote, "Some among us possess a psychic apparatus so finely attuned that they absorb not only conscious communication but the whole unconscious atmosphere of their surroundings." Modern research by Dr. Elaine Aron on highly sensitive persons echoes Jung's observations. Her studies indicate that about 20% of people show heightened sensory and emotional responsiveness. Yet Jung went further, identifying something narrower in his typology. The introverted intuitive type, perhaps 1% of the population. These individuals don't simply feel deeply, they perceive unconscious structures with startling clarity. Jung described how their minds register not just surface signals but hidden emotional currents, repressed content, and unnoticed patterns. They detect despair behind forced smiles. They sense desperation beneath confident appearances. They feel the collective shadow that groups unconsciously collude to ignore. He warned, the danger does not lie in the perception itself, but in the psychic isolation it brings. To see what others cannot, or will not, makes one a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. This, he said, leads to the problem of the superior function, where one's greatest gift becomes one's heaviest burden, because it severs the person from collective unconscious belonging. More critically, Jung found the true danger was not the perception itself, but the reaction it provokes. Those with heightened perception inevitably see others' unconscious material too clearly. As a result, they become targets of what Jung termed shadow projection. When people attack the one who reflects back what they refuse to face in themselves. In Psychology of the Unconscious, he wrote, "Nothing exerts greater psychological influence on one's surroundings, and particularly on children, than the unlived life of the parent." Jung realized this applied universally. Whenever someone's hidden shadow is mirrored back by another person's clear perception, the psyche faces only two choices: integrate the shadow or attack the mirror. Jung observed this destructive pattern again and again in his clinical practice. The one who perceives reality with clarity often gets accused of creating the very issues they only point out. Jung's patients with differentiated intuition faced this repeatedly. If they carefully suggested that someone appeared upset, the person would lash out at them for being negative or stirring up drama. When they voiced concern about obvious difficulties, they were blamed for being judgmental or inventing problems that supposedly weren't there. Jung recognized this was no accident. It was a defense mechanism. In memories, dreams, reflections, he explained, everything that irritates us about others can guide us toward understanding ourselves. Yet for most, it feels easier to attack the one who mirrors their shadow than to look at what is being revealed. This dynamic formed what Jung described as the scapegoat phenomenon. Highly perceptive people frequently become the identified problem in any group they join, not because they cause trouble, but because they uncover difficulties already present in the collective unconscious. Jung noted, "The bearer of superior perception becomes the vessel for all that the group refuses to admit about itself. As a result, such people don't just feel misunderstood, they feel deliberately targeted by a force that defies rational explanation." But Jung's most unsettling realization was still ahead. He noticed that overwhelming perception didn't manifest in one uniform way. Instead, he distinguished four main patterns within the introverted intuitive type, each representing a unique style of processing unconscious material from others. Type 1. The feeling intuitive. Jung described patients whose introverted intuition was paired with a strong feeling function. These individuals didn't just notice what was happening psychologically, they absorbed it physically. Others' emotions poured directly into them, leaving them unable to tell apart their own genuine feelings from those they unconsciously picked up. Jung wrote, "The feeling intuitive lives in a constant state of emotional contagion, carrying the unexpressed emotions of everyone nearby." Type 2. The thinking intuitive. This group perceived psychological patterns and could anticipate future outcomes with astonishing accuracy. Jung observed that they often predicted relationship breakdowns, career collapses, and personal crises months before they happened, not through logical reasoning but through unconscious pattern detection. He noted, "They show a remarkable talent for grasping the logical consequences of unconscious processes that others cannot yet recognize." Type 3. The sensation intuitive. These were patients Jung described as sensing the bodily expressions of psychological states. They detected illness before symptoms surfaced, sensed fatigue before it was admitted, and picked up on muscular tension that revealed hidden emotional turmoil. Jung wrote, "Such individuals act like early warning systems for both physical and psychological disturbances in their surroundings." Type 4. The pure intuitive. The rarest of all, this type combined introverted intuition with what Jung called an undifferentiated auxiliary function. They saw an enormous amount yet struggled to order or communicate what they perceived. Jung noted, "They live in constant overwhelm, receiving torrents of unconscious material without sufficient psychological structure to process it effectively." Recognizing your own pattern is critical, since each type requires a different approach to what Jung called the integration challenge. But before addressing that, one must understand why Jung considered this discovery so hazardous. He had seen firsthand the destructive effects of unintegrated perception in his patients. From this, he concluded that perceiving everything without proper psychological containment created real danger for both the individual and society. Jung described three specific risks that made this phenomenon so threatening. Danger 1. Disruption of the collective unconscious. Jung wrote, "The individual who perceives too clearly endangers the unspoken agreements that social unity relies on." When someone pierces the shared illusions that bind groups together, the silent contracts about what will and won't be acknowledged, they destabilize the collective itself. He observed that families, organizations, and societies partly depend on ignoring certain truths. The highly perceptive person undermines these agreements simply by existing authentically. Danger 2. Psychological isolation. Jung described how differentiated perception creates what he termed the problem of the superior function, when a person's greatest strength becomes their deepest suffering. He wrote, "The curse of consciousness lies in its inability to be shared with those who do not possess it. The conscious individual becomes an island in a vast ocean of unconsciousness." This isolation, he emphasized, was not merely social, it was profoundly existential. Many of these individuals described the sensation of existing in an entirely different reality from those around them. Danger 3. Identity dissolution. Jung found this to be the most perilous outcome of superior perception. People who unconsciously absorb the psychic material of others often lose touch with their own authentic personality. They become so saturated with external content that the line between their own psyche and the collective fades away. Jung referred to this as participation mystique, a condition where the individual's psychological boundaries collapse, merging them with the unconscious life of the collective. He warned, the danger is not merely social isolation, but psychological annihilation, the complete replacement of individuality by collective possession. For this reason, Jung believed that integrating heightened perception was not only therapeutically valuable but psychologically urgent. Left unintegrated, it posed profound risks. To address this, he formulated what he termed the individuation process, a structured path to preserving one's identity while consciously relating to unconscious material. Phase 1. Recognition and differentiation. Jung instructed his perceptive patients to first identify when they were absorbing what did not belong to them. He called this conscious discrimination, the practice of separating genuine inner experience from unconsciously adopted impressions. The first task, Jung wrote, is to establish what is yours and what belongs to others. Without this distinction, no authentic development is possible. One method he prescribed was daily solitude, allowing the psyche to settle and reveal which thoughts and emotions were truly their own. Phase 2. Shadow integration. Jung observed that those who so readily perceived the shadow in others often did so because they had not yet faced their own. The more a person disowns their potential for deception, cruelty, or selfishness, the more intolerable they find it when reflected in others. He wrote, "Everything that irritates us in others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, but only if we turn inward, rather than remaining fixated outward." Integration of the shadow means accepting that one contains every human trait they recognize externally. This does not corrupt one's character. Rather, it makes them whole and capable of perceiving without condemnation. Phase 3. Conscious participation. The culmination of individuation involved what Jung called conscious participation in the collective unconscious. This is the ability to engage with others' psychological material without drowning in it or forfeiting one's own identity. The individuated person, he wrote, becomes a bridge between consciousness and the unconscious, assisting others in bringing what is hidden to light, while retaining their own integrity. To do this, individuals must cultivate psychological containers. The capacity to temporarily hold another's unconscious content while remembering it is not their own. Jung recognized that superior perception could either transform or destroy. To illustrate this, he studied historical figures, comparing those who failed to integrate their insights with those who succeeded. The case of Nietzsche, unintegrated perception. Jung was profoundly shaped by Nietzsche's philosophy, yet he also saw in him a tragic example of collapse under unassimilated perception. In Memories, Dreams, Reflections, Jung described Nietzsche's ability to cut through the illusions of religion, morality, and philosophy with merciless clarity. However, Nietzsche never found a constructive way to integrate this perception. Instead of channeling it toward healing, he wielded it like a weapon against the world. Jung wrote, Nietzsche possessed remarkable vision into the human condition, yet he remained identified with his superior function rather than integrating it into a balanced personality. His isolation and eventual psychological breakdown revealed what happens when perception dominates the individual instead of transforming them. The case of Meister Eckhart, successful integration. Jung devoted extensive study to the medieval mystic Meister Eckhart, whom he regarded as a living example of successfully integrated superior perception. Eckhart embodied what Jung called mystical intuition, the capacity to grasp spiritual and psychological dimensions inaccessible to most people. Yet unlike Nietzsche, Eckhart did not allow these insights to isolate or consume him. Instead, he channeled them into compassionate service. Jung observed, Eckhart transformed his superior perception into wisdom that nourished others rather than overwhelming them. He saw deeply, yet expressed himself in a way that invited understanding instead of resistance. Jung highlighted that Eckhart's strength came from what he described as conscious humility, the recognition that extraordinary perception is not a weapon to dominate others but a gift to be shared wisely and responsibly. Jung's own integration journey. Most profoundly, Jung chronicled his personal battle with overwhelming perception during his famous confrontation with the unconscious between 1913 and 1919, recorded in the Red Book. He admitted, I stood on the brink of psychosis and survived only because I could interpret what was happening through my work with patients. His superior sensitivity to unconscious contents, both within himself and in others, nearly shattered him, until he learned to integrate these experiences consciously. The turning point came when Jung realized that these overpowering perceptions were not signs of mental illness but signals of evolutionary growth. They represented consciousness striving to move beyond the limitations of the collective psyche. This realization reshaped his approach to patients with similar gifts, many of whom faced unbearable isolation. Because of this, Jung emphasized the necessity of finding what he called the few who understand. These are individuals capable of engaging with differentiated consciousness without defensiveness or fear. As he wrote in The Development of Personality, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But such becoming cannot occur in isolation. It requires recognition by others who can witness authenticity." Jung identified three vital forms of relationship for the highly perceptive individual. 1. Fellow individuated persons. Jung wrote, "The individuated person recognizes another instantly. There is a presence, a reality that cannot be faked." These meetings often feel immediate and powerful, as if two members of what Jung called the conscious minority had discovered one another. Such relationships are rare, but indispensable, because only here can one be fully authentic without fear of threatening or overwhelming others. 2. Those engaged in individuation. Jung noted that people actively involved in their own inner work, therapy, spiritual practice, or self-exploration, may not have superior perception themselves, yet they can appreciate and tolerate it. He explained, "Those who have begun to know themselves can bear to be known by others." 3. Natural containers. Finally, Jung described individuals who, even without superior perception, naturally possess what he called container function, the ability to hold psychological content without collapse or defensiveness. These are often mature people who have endured deep life struggles, which give them the resilience to remain grounded while engaging with unconscious material. The recognition process. To help his patients discern safe relationships, Jung laid out specific signs. Trustworthy companions are those who ask genuine questions instead of instantly defending themselves, who can acknowledge their own contradictions without shame, who display psychological mindedness, an interest in inner reality, who remain steady in the face of difficult truths, and who show sincere curiosity about growth and consciousness. The gradual revelation protocol. Jung also advised caution in disclosing perceptive abilities. He suggested a 5-step approach. First step, begin with small, non-threatening observations. Second step, pay close attention to how the other person responds. Third step, evaluate whether they react with curiosity or defensiveness. Fourth step, increase the depth of disclosure only if they demonstrate capacity. Fifth step, always frame insights as offerings, not as absolute declarations. For Jung, the aim was never to find people who accepted everything uncritically, but to identify those who could engage with perception as a meaningful contribution, rather than experiencing it as a threat to their self-image. Because when superior perception is integrated, it ceases to be merely a personal burden. Instead, it becomes a resource that advances both individual development and collective evolution. Therefore, Jung regarded successful individuation as vital not only for individual well-being but also for the broader evolution of human consciousness. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote that the individual has always been the vessel of the living spirit, the one who initiates true change within society. Jung believed that those who learn to integrate their heightened perception become what he termed culture carriers, people who serve as agents of consciousness evolution. The 4 stages of transformation. Stage 1. Recognition without overwhelm. The first stage begins when an individual learns to acknowledge their perceptive abilities without being crushed by them. Jung described this as the conscious acceptance of the superior function. He wrote, "The beginning of wisdom is the recognition of what one actually is, not what one wishes to be or fears to be." Stage 2. Integration without isolation. In this phase, perception is used constructively while still maintaining meaningful human connections. Jung referred to this as social individuation, the process of becoming fully oneself while staying engaged with the world. He observed that the individuated person does not withdraw from life but instead participates in it more consciously. Stage 3. Service without sacrifice. The third transformation arises when perception shifts from being a burden carried privately to a gift offered publicly. Jung called this conscious participation, the ability to employ one's unique insights in service to others without personal depletion. As he wrote, The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are and then to offer that authentic self in service of the whole. Stage 4. Legacy without attachment. The final stage involves what Jung termed the transcendent function, the capacity to contribute one's perception to the growth of collective consciousness without being attached to recognition or approval. Jung observed, the individuated person works for the future, not for personal recognition in the present. The integration becomes cultural medicine. For Jung, individuals who successfully integrate superior perception fulfill a crucial evolutionary role. They are able to recognize what collective consciousness has not yet brought into awareness, thereby preparing humanity for its next steps in development. He wrote, "What is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate." In this sense, highly perceptive individuals who achieve integration help transform unconscious material into conscious awareness before it can erupt destructively in collective behavior. Pitfalls of the transformation process. Jung cautioned, however, that the path of integrating superior perception is fraught with dangers. He outlined the most common derailments that can obstruct or even reverse the individuation process. Pitfall 1. The inflation trap. Jung wrote extensively about psychological inflation, which occurs when individuals identify with their superior function instead of integrating it. In 2 essays on analytical psychology, he warned, the danger is that the ego identifies with the archetype, leading to an inflation that cuts the individual off from human relationships. Many gifted individuals fall into what Jung termed the prophet complex, believing it is their duty to rescue everyone from unconsciousness. This mindset leads to preaching, judgment, and ultimately isolation. As Jung observed, the moment one believes oneself to be the bearer of absolute truth, one has fallen into the trap of unconscious possession by the very forces one seeks to understand. Pitfall 2. Withdrawal justification. Jung noted that some individuals rationalize complete withdrawal from society by claiming that others are too unconscious to engage with. He saw this as spiritual superiority disguised as wisdom. Jung wrote, "True individuation requires engagement with the unconscious world, not escape from it. The hermit who withdraws from life has not transcended it, but has been defeated by it." Pitfall 3. The helper's snare. Jung also described how some highly perceptive individuals become addicted to being needed. Their identity fuses entirely with their role as helpers, causing them to lose touch with their own inner growth. He warned, when perception becomes identity, the person disappears behind the function. This is not individuation but its opposite, the sacrifice of personality to role. Pitfall 4. The overwhelm return. Finally, even those who have integrated their superior perception may regress under extreme stress, trauma, or major life transitions, finding themselves again overwhelmed by what they once managed to balance. They stop maintaining their psychological boundaries and, as a result, become flooded again with the unconscious material of others. Jung emphasized that integration is not a permanent achievement, but a dynamic process requiring constant conscious attention. The maintenance of integration. To sustain healthy integration, Jung outlined ongoing practices designed to protect balance and prevent regression. These included regular solitude, which allows individuals to distinguish their own inner contents from material unconsciously absorbed from others. Conscious choice about when and with whom to engage perceptive abilities. Ongoing shadow work, ensuring that one's own unconscious material does not spill outward as projection. Connection with others who can provide honest reality checks and grounded support. Creative expression as a constructive outlet for overwhelming perceptual input. Jung summarized this approach with the reminder that the integrated person does not achieve perfection, but learns to dance consciously with their own psychological complexity. Because he always viewed superior perception within the larger context of collective psychological evolution, Jung consistently emphasized its cultural dimension. In The Undiscovered Self, he wrote, "The individual has always been the carrier of the living spirit, the one who brings about the change in society." He believed that highly perceptive people serve as what he called consciousness pioneers, individuals whose psychological growth precedes collective readiness. The historical pattern throughout history, Jung observed, individuals with superior perception often surfaced before society was prepared to assimilate their insights. They functioned as scouts, exploring psychological frontiers that humanity would later be compelled to navigate. As he put it, what appears in the individual first as psychological insight later manifests in the collective as cultural transformation. The individual serves as a laboratory for consciousness experiments that will eventually benefit the whole. Modern manifestations in the modern age. Jung believed that perceptive individuals might be registering realities not yet obvious to the collective, such as underlying psychological patterns driving collective behavior, the roots of environmental and social unsustainability, emerging spiritual possibilities that transcend traditional religious frameworks, unrecognized implications of advancing technology, collective shadow contents requiring conscious integration. He noted, the sensitive individual feels the collective problems first and most intensely. Their personal symptoms often reflect what the entire culture needs to address. Service without martyrdom. Jung's crucial insight was that superior perception serves evolution best when integrated consciously rather than suffered unconsciously. The task, therefore, is not to become a martyr to consciousness but to act as a bridge between what is and what is becoming. He wrote, the individuated person serves the collective not by sacrificing their individuality, but by developing it so completely that it becomes a gift to the whole. The ultimate integration at its highest expression, Jung observed, perceptive individuals hold their abilities lightly. They see with clarity yet without attachment to others' responses, accept what they perceive, and engage deeply without compulsion to correct or rescue everything they witness. Jung referred to this as the transcendent function, the natural capacity to contribute to consciousness evolution by embodying more conscious ways of being, rather than by preaching or forcing change. A case of transformation. Jung often illustrated these principles through clinical experience. He recalled the introverted intuitive patient who came to him in 1913, at the height of his own confrontation with the unconscious. After 3 years of working within the individuation framework, her life was profoundly altered. She learned to separate her own psychological contents from the unconscious material of others. She found meaningful work as a counselor, where her differentiated perception became a resource for those in distress. She cultivated relationships with people who welcomed her insights rather than fearing them. Most importantly, she stopped experiencing her perception as a curse and began to recognize it as a gift requiring careful, conscious development. Jung wrote of her transformation, the patient learned not to see less, but to see more wisely, not to perceive less deeply, but to engage more consciously with what she perceived. Her perceptive gift remained, but her relationship to it had been transfigured, from overwhelming burden to integrated strength. This brings us to what Jung considered his most dangerous discovery: that certain individuals are born with a level of consciousness exceeding collective readiness. Such advanced perception stands at a crossroads. It will either overwhelm and isolate them, leading to destruction, or transform them into precisely what humanity requires for its psychological evolution. Your superior perception is not a flaw in your psychological design. It is not evidence that you are broken or abnormal. It is, rather, an advanced feature of consciousness development. You see what others miss because you are psychologically ahead of your time. The true question, then, is not whether you should suppress your perception in order to conform to collective unconsciousness, but whether you will cultivate the individuation skills necessary to integrate it consciously. Jung's method of individuation provides this path. From dangerous isolation to conscious service, from overwhelming perception to integrated wisdom, from what feels like a curse into what becomes a profound evolutionary contribution. You were not born to suffer silently under the weight of extraordinary vision. You were born to serve consciousness evolution. The world needs what you see, but it needs those insights delivered with integration, humility, and strategic wisdom, so that dangerous perception becomes cultural medicine. Your gift is not your burden. Your unconscious relationship to your gift is your burden. By integrating it consciously, you become precisely what Jung believed highly perceptive individuals were meant to be: consciousness pioneers, preparing humanity for stages of development that are inevitable, though not yet visible. Jung's most dangerous discovery, then, was not merely that some people see everything. It was that most who do never learn to use what they see wisely. The danger lies not in perception itself, but in failing to cultivate a conscious relationship with extraordinary abilities. You are not too much for this world. You are exactly what the evolution of consciousness requires. Once you learn to wield your perception with the same conscious discipline that Jung himself struggled to develop. The danger of seeing everything is not that you see too much. It is that you might never learn to see with the wisdom and integration your gifts demand. If you recognize yourself in Jung's description of the highly perceptive individual, then you belong to a rare psychological type he regarded as essential for humanity's evolution. You are not alone on this path. Others are walking it too, and individuation is the bridge that connects you. Thanks for watching. See you very soon. You'll definitely meet me.